Welcome back, everyone. This is the first entry in the reaction and review series, and I thought I would talk about a recently published article in the Washington Post. And this article is a collection of overviews, quotes, and reviews that are motivated and inspired by published works that I've linked in the description box below. So the title of this article is People from Elite Backgrounds Increasingly Dominate Academia, Data Shows. Okay, just to bring everybody up to speed, if you haven't read this article yet, the content is largely geared toward the field of economics. Okay. Economics is very math intensive, so I'm going to consider that relevant to the STEM community. And I'm going to talk about how what is written in this article is super relevant for the under the hood community. So I'm going to read a couple quotes and give my comments and what I think about what they're saying. So the author of this article starts the article off in the beginning talking about some statistics. It states, in 1970, just 1 in 5 U.S.-born PhD graduates in economics had a parent with a graduate degree. Now, 2/3 of them do, according to a new analysis from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. The trends are similar for other fields and for foreign-born students, but economics is off the charts. In another quote from the article, it says, the data show that the elite dominate even more among the top schools that produce about half of all future economics professors. Among the top 15 programs, a whopping 78% of new PhDs since 2010 had a parent with a graduate degree, while just 6% are first-generation college students. So I found this statistic to be fairly not great. Okay, this is pretty scary to see that the percentage of first-generation scholars is declining. That speaks to a number of different challenges that I'll talk about further into this video. So I wanted to comment that fortunately, the current federal administration, and at least in the executive branch, has recognized that fewer and fewer persons of color, BIPOC, are entering into the STEM workforce. And so in an announcement back in 2021, the administration announced that it would be investing more resources into minority serving institutions so that we can, quote unquote, tap into a portion of our population that hasn't really been tapped, to improve and increase the number of domestic people that are entering into the STEM workforce. So it has been explicitly stated that nurturing and training up BIPOC students is a great way to increase the number of domestic STEM workforce people, which is desperately needed in this day. So going back to the article, it says, elite social networks determine which economists get accepted at top schools and published in top journals, and it can be difficult for first generation students to break in. All right, this is very much true for other STEM fields. Oftentimes, who you know helps you get into school. Your network and your associations to well-known researchers gives you a little bit of credibility when it comes to making your way through the door. This is the same for publishing in top journals. So we should keep that in mind when we're trying to be more inclusive in STEM spaces and to try to push back on this elite social network. So further in the article, here is a quote from Professor Robert Metcalf from the University of Southern California. He says, "I'm always on catch-up. That's because I come from a background that didn't know anything about academia. I got tenured before the age of 40, but I just feel like I'm always one step behind in the academy." Now, USC is a pretty renowned institution, and this is a pretty powerful quote from someone that has achieved, relatively big success, achieving tenure at such an early age. But Professor Metcalf states explicitly that they feel behind. I also felt this way through the majority of my academic career. Like, I was constantly on the catch up for various things. So I'm happy to say that is slowly changing, and I'm relaxing more into my journey because I feel like I have more resources available to me at the institutional level and at the personal level, such that I can relax a little bit, enjoy my career, and not have to worry about the things that come along with structural inequalities. So there's more. In this quote that is taken from the caption in the figure that you see on the screen. It says, "One explanation of why people from elite backgrounds dominate academia, when many of a job's rewards are non-monetary, that job tends to be done by people for whom cash is not a concern." Wow, wow, wow. I never thought I'd see this in print. This is something that I've seen. It's something that has bothered me a time or two or 1,000. I quickly realized this in graduate school. So most of my classmates in graduate school, they came from middle to upper class backgrounds. In fact, some of them were really wealthy. For a long time, I assumed that everybody was in grad school to get a leg up, but I was quickly, I learned better, and I realized that people were there because they genuinely wanted to learn, and they were excited about learning, and they really had no struggles, and so graduate school was a fun time. I've mentioned before that I had to carry 3 jobs at one point before I started my PhD program, and I was able to take a step back from one of the 3 because of the fellowships that I received. So once again, it was kind of a shock to me to know that I was probably the only student in my research group that had financial struggles. So it's not difficult to fathom or believe that I was the only black student on my wing or on my floor of the building that I was in. And in my program, like the environmental engineering program, I was one of about 3 or 4 PhD students at that time. And so what I concluded is that we are, as in first generation, BIPOC, low income students, we simply just don't have the luxury to study in a space that won't offer financial security when we graduate. Okay, so for a long time, I went back and forth about whether or not majoring in environmental engineering was my best choice, because it's not the highest earning major that I could have taken. I could have done something that would pay a lot more upon graduation with a PhD. I'm happy to say that I'm glad I'm in this field. It actually is very rewarding, and the work, I think, will have a large impact on, hopefully, many people. So getting back to the article, I thought this next point was interesting. And I quote, "At every point where first generation students typically fall through the cracks, Professor Metcalf was fortunate to find mentors from working class backgrounds who could help him through." And Metcalf states, "I would not be an academic economist today if senior role models who shared my working class background hadn't helped me navigate and survive elite academic institutions such as the University of Oxford and the University of Chicago." So I also found this to be pretty profound. Okay. I too share this in common with Professor Metcalf. I have always had champions along the way to get me through seemingly like glass ceilings that my background should have not allowed me to go through. So I didn't always receive direct mentorship, but those champions kind of pushed me through every lock and channel, right? So to fill in this kind of like lack of direct mentorship, I'm going to attribute my background to helping me actually survive in this academic system. So because of some of the childhood challenges and traumas that I experienced, I have hyper awareness and hypersensitivity to my environment. Most of us from, low income backgrounds, we have this. And so it makes you keenly aware and observant of your environment, which is developed as a survival skill. So a lot of times I notice things that people or that my peers that are from privileged backgrounds just don't notice because they've never had to pay attention to certain things to survive. And so this hypersensitivity and hyper awareness allowed me to really study and observe the patterns of success in other people that I sought to emulate in order to survive in the system. So we had quite a few people to go on to get professorships in my research group as a grad student. And so I made sure to look at their CVs, look at their dissertations, ask them about how many jobs they applied to, and I used weight of evidence from a bunch of different people to figure out what a successful academic was. So not only are champions and role models helpful, I'd say if you do come from a background where you've had to be hyper vigilant and hyper aware, that could also help you survive in this system. And one more quote here. This summer, and this is directly from the article, this summer, Professor Metcalf and his colleague John List aim to expand their mentoring with a student workshop called First Gen Research and Mentoring in Economics, or the acronym is FRAME. So this is pretty common for people that go through a tough time as a first generation scholar and whatnot. they tend to pay it forward because they know how hard it was. And so that reminds me very much of the Under the Hood community, which is meant to serve that purpose as well. And I would really like for this space to reach broad audiences, including international audiences. So now I'm going to talk about the work that is featured from Professor Anna Stansberry of MIT, whose work really is highlighted in this article. I encourage you guys to go read the original article. So her research is featured here, and the article states that she also wonders if courses like Econ 101 might put off students from low-income backgrounds. And she, quote, says, "I also worry that some of the terminology that's used, like unskilled and low ability, to describe people who are in low-paid jobs or with little formal education is offensive," Stansberry said. So she is commenting on the fact that the formal terms that are used in economics education may be turning away the first generation scholars that may have ended up moving into that space as a graduate student or even a professor because of exclusionary language. And so we can see from the graphic here on the screen that the percentage of first generation scholars or PhD graduates has declined drastically, both for US born students, and you can look at the article and see the graph for foreign born students. Okay, while if you look on the right, you can see that the percentage of PhD graduates with at least one parent with a postgraduate degree is going way up. All right, so economics has a pretty drastic curve compared to the other fields that they studied. And so once again, I want to tie this back to the Under the Hood community. So while I haven't explored the data myself for let's say environmental engineering or chemical engineering, I can recognize from anecdotal evidence that there is kind of a gap in preparation for academia. I see people nowadays that are second and third generation academics, and then I see people that are first gen that want to go into academia and want to be a professor, but there's just a lot of gaps that need to be filled in what's called a hidden curriculum that I'll talk about in just a minute. So many times I've said to myself and I've said to others, academia is pay for play. So you have to have the resources to get there and to thrive there in a way that doesn't deteriorate your mental health. Academia is full of hidden costs, and by academia I mean graduate school and beyond. I'll talk about some of those hidden costs in a separate video. So essentially, starting as a grad student, if you are wealthy or from upper middle class background, you know in your mind that you're gonna have to slum it for maybe 5 to 10 years because the housing near campus may not be great, or the salary is going to be pretty low. But most of the upper middle class people that I know, their incomes are supplemented by help from their parents. And not only that, if they have to live in low quality housing in school, they actually have ready access to go back home to mom and dad's house, where it's comfortable, where they have resources, and so you get a bit of a respite from the slums of graduate school. On the other hand, for first generation people or for people without parental support, such as myself, we actually have to create our own comfort, right? We have to create our own comfort to return to after, dealing with the stresses of graduate school. And that's the part that's expensive. So not everyone can deal with the low quality housing and the sometimes really low salary as a graduate student. So you supplement that, say, with a student loan, or you end up picking up 2 and 3 jobs so that you can maintain somewhat of a high quality of life, because once again, being first generation as a graduate student is really hard. And I'll talk about financials in a separate video. Moving through the article, all right, they then begin to talk about who is pretty much self-selected or pre-selected for academic jobs. So the article states, who gets to be in the kinds of occupations you associate with more creative, enjoyable, and fulfilling work. We found that among people with similar levels of education, people in those jobs disproportionately come from richer families, said Boston College economist Daniel Lashkari. Okay, wow. We know this in the back of our minds, but we, just seeing it in print is really profound for me. So I always knew I could never be like an art curator. I could never major in the arts. I knew I needed to major in STEM because it's a guaranteed paycheck most of the time. As you can tell from perusing my social media, I like to create. I like to do things other than really cognitively taxing tasks like mathematics and engineering and analytical work. While that's fulfilling as well, and I would consider myself somewhat good at it, I like to indulge in the arts as well. But we don't, if you don't come from a background that can supplement your income or ensure that you have stable housing, it's just simply not an option unless you want to struggle, okay? Or unless you're comfortable struggling. I was not comfortable struggling, so I made sure to choose a career path that would set me up for stability. So, in general, my thoughts are, your job and your career is fun when you have resources, okay? When you're less resourced, these jobs and these careers can be very stressful, okay? And so one thing I always like to ask myself to just check in is, if I won the lottery tomorrow, would I still show up to this job? Would I still show up as a professor? And so the answer is yes. Yes, I would. And I would probably be even more happier. I would be happier in my position if I, won the lottery and finances and financial issues just simply disappeared. I would still be a professor. Yeah. So the next part of the article that's talking about, who chooses what career, it states, in a recent working paper, Lashkari and New York University's Karina Bohr used a long-running U.S. survey to calculate the quality of life enjoyed by professionals in scores of different jobs based on worker treatment, physical strain, intellectual stimulation, and worker autonomy. At the top of the list, we find professors and other post-secondary educators, curators, and librarians and architects. So you can see the graphic for what they're talking about here, and the ranking for the occupations that are associated with the highest quality of life. Yeah, professors and post-secondary educators are the top ranked. And I can corroborate this with my own personal experience. So I always get the question, how did I know I wanted to go into academia? Why did I choose it? Well, as a first generation student, I tried to take internships in government, industry, consulting, for-profit, etc. And I found that industry and profit-driven work wasn't my style. I wasn't into that. No, I didn't have the luxury I had a bit of the luxury to choose, but I was hedging some student loans on the fact that I thought that I'd have a good shot at an academic career. I didn't want a government position because I thought that the work was predictable, and while the positions are stable, I found that the bureaucracy was going to be just too much for me to handle. So I recognized that perhaps getting a PhD, like I said, and hedging, about 4 or 5 years of my life would eventually allow me to indulge in a career of intellectual freedom that wouldn't be bound by profit margins, and I'd get to work on whatever I wanted that was within reason and that met the spirit of the institution I worked at. But I knew early on that I would have to pay my dues up front because I am first generation. I didn't have a lot of family support, but I knew that the investment would pay off one day. So getting back to the article, it says, the academics then used surveys that follow people across lifetimes and generations to find out whether certain jobs were more or less likely to attract people from wealthy backgrounds than people with more humble roots. When they compared the two lists, they found a strong relationship between a job's non-monetary benefit and how attractive it was to children from high-income households. And I quote, "To them, an extra $25,000 difference just doesn't mean that much." Meaning, if they had an offer that was $25,000 more, they wouldn't take it if it wasn't aligned with their passions. Back to the quote, whereas someone without a privileged background is less likely to pass up a better paid work in finance or law. Okay, so I hear and see this over and over and over again with my colleagues that are from underprivileged backgrounds. They got their PhD, they were out of academia, they were tired of living in poverty, and they took the high-paying job in consulting. Most people just don't want to accept the super low income that comes along with being a graduate student or a postdoc. Essentially, those of us that choose to stay in academia that are from underprivileged backgrounds, it stings because we're looking around and we're seeing our peers that are in non-academic positions taking advantage of higher income and earning potential, and adding to their 401ks at a higher rate than we are. So I'd say that for those of you that are thinking about choosing academia, there are about 5 to 8 years where your earning potential is not met. But on the other side of this, like I said, is the intellectual freedom and the high quality of life that I think is unparalleled and is unmatched in any other field. Returning back to the article, now they begin to talk about the experiences of Professor Lucy Schmidt of Smith College, who they described as a first-generation student who was a single mother during her studies. So they say that she never thought about studying economics, but saw the benefit to studying it to address poverty, the actual area she cared about. And she says, quote, "There's a pretty direct link, I think, between the things that I'm interested in and my personal history," end quote. So I thought that was pretty profound, that, you know, she brought her authentic self to her studies and found a way to link that to more traditional economic postgraduate education. And so this leads me to think about some of the advice that I always give my mentees that are first generation or from underprivileged backgrounds. I always tell them sometimes you have to study it's beneficial to study the fundamental in the traditional science and engineering, especially if you're in STEM, to have a solid foundation of the technical background so that you can address the things that you're actually interested in, such as injustices and inequities, and this combination of interest and training ends up putting you in a pretty unique position to lend your credibility that's often missing in those spaces when it comes to advocating for social and structural issues. So your perspective at the intersection of formal STEM training and your passion for social justice is unique. And I'd say right now it's needed now more than ever in the U.S. So I'll reiterate. Most people who grow up in dire circumstances, filled with childhood trauma, they usually want to work in the area that will directly address those traumas or benefit their communities, so that they can feel like they're making a difference in those areas. So I want to encourage anybody who wants to do research that helps with social issues. You may be successful with studying a STEM field, which will set you up for more resources upon graduation. But we need to recognize that there are some barriers to that path, but that's why I am making this content. Okay, so that you can take that path, the STEM social justice path, but make sure to indulge in content like Under the Hood so you can learn how to advocate for yourself, learn how to take care of yourself in this space, find the resources you need to supplement and gap fill those inequitable circumstances. This content is meant to help you preempt any challenges that you might experience as a first-gen underserved student, just like me, just like I was. And I'm here to help you avoid the pitfalls that I went through, and also to give you a preview of what your career could look like after you've gone through those challenges. So in another nice quote another nice statement from the article, it says, the chosen people at birth don't have a monopoly on innovative ideas. Wow. That's pretty profound. In my experience, I have found the same, and it's actually the unchosen that have some of the most brilliant ideas. All right? A lot of times people don't want to listen to the unchosen. We want to listen to and look at the faces that are deemed to be smart by default. Okay? But let me tell you something. Adversity actually breeds creativity. And adversity trains you in real life how to problem solve, which is an excellent skill you need for STEM research. So people that actually come from poverty or, traumatic circumstances and that have survived it, they are natural born analytical thinkers. Or they were socialized to be analytical thinkers. It's just that they need some guidance on how to harness and make good use of those transferable skills. All right. They also need to be taught and guided on how to find the structural support that they need to survive in the academic system that pre-selects for wealthy people. That's all you need. You just need the handbook to tell you how to put to good use those skills that you learned and your resourcefulness when you grew up, in an underprivileged community. On the other hand, think about if you are a student from an under-resourced community, think about your wealthy counterpart. If they've never had a real life issue, where then comes their perspective on how to solve problems for somebody else? Okay? And so this leads to, oftentimes when certain people sit around the table to solve issues on behalf of people who they don't connect with and they have no personal perspective about the issues faced to them, they can actually end up causing unintentional harm to those populations. If you don't have a clue about what they're going through, you can make suggestions that actually hurt them more. And I'm actually going to teach a new course in the fall at Berkeley on data and equity. And we will discuss unintended consequences of decisions that are made by engineers on behalf of populations that they a lot of times can't relate to. The next thing I'll say is I actually talk to my mentees a lot about, the guidance that they'll need to get through this system. And I call it the hidden curriculum. All right. And I'll just give a teaser about some things that are in the hidden curriculum. So this may be not in the general awareness of under-resourced students. Well, say you're an undergraduate in science and you want to do your graduate work in engineering. Well, the difference between those two majors is often the math courses. So it's the science version of the degree oftentimes does not require linear algebra or differential equations, which is a prerequisite for many of the engineering courses. And so those who are having aversion to math, don't want to take those math prerequisites, are oftentimes either slowed down when they get to their engineering degree, or they're just shut out from engineering, period, because the mathematics courses are just too big of a barrier to overcome. Another part of the hidden curriculum that may not be in the forefront of people's minds is that first generation students oftentimes suffer in the first 1 to 2 years of school because it's just such a culture shock, especially if they're in an institution that doesn't have resources available to that group. And they end up with what I call permanent scarring on their GPA. Okay, but you do really well in your third and fourth year after you've adjusted, and then you can bring your GPA back up. But this has long-term consequences, not consequences that can't be overcome, but consequences nonetheless. So a lower GPA actually weakens your application to graduate school. So if you don't have an advocate in the program that you're applying to, most times you will get knocked for a lower GPA, which is simply because you got to college and you had no support and you were figuring your way around with no support. And so Under the Hood is meant to try to intervene during that period. All right. So don't be discouraged. If you have the opportunity to take on an undergraduate research experience, even if your GPA has suffered a little bit, if you do an exceptional job as an undergraduate researcher, that can also go a long way for your graduate application. Even research at the post-baccalaureate stage can help as well. So I'm going to end this conversation by reading this part of the last part of the article, which states, step back and ask yourself, how many other ideas did we lose because of exclusivity? Many future breakthroughs will come from individuals with off-the-beaten-path histories. It is not only equitable to give everyone a shot, I firmly believe it is efficient too. Okay, so this is also a bit nerve-wracking for me to think about how many people that could have been making discoveries to benefit marginalized communities just were not able to make their way through this system. But we're hoping to, stop that leak and focus on retention. And we can focus on retention not by complaining about how hard it was for us and never providing the next generation with the tools they need to survive, but we can create resources. And by resources, I mean free and accessible resources to help us retain the talent that is getting lost due to structural inequalities. So I'll say that the onus is partially on us as professors to protect and curate the talented students that have off the beaten path histories. Okay, we have resources and power at our disposal to create reasonable and solid paths forward for these non-traditional students. They just need us to help them co-create a few workarounds so that they can successfully make their way through this system. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the discussion of this article. I found the article to be pretty compelling. Make sure to read or check out the referenced academic materials from the article by Schultz and Stansberry, published in the Peterson Institute for International Economics publication in 2022, the Bohr and Lashkari work from the National Bureau of Economic Research publication in 2022, and I've linked the White House briefing about investment in MSIs. This has been Dr. Sunshine with Reaction and Review, and I'll see you in the next one.